Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
So Phil reckons if there are 3,000 people on a terror watch list here in the UK, they should be rounded up for the protection of the public. Other sources tell us that there are 25,000 radical jihadists in the country. I spoke about this last night and truthfully said, I don't know. How could I know? 25,000 is an awful lot. So we're going to discuss that and more with our next guest. She's a remarkable woman. She really is. She came on this programme last year to talk about her own experiences with child abuse, with mind control, phone hacking and much more. That's on youtube.com. She was well known to you anyway. I didn't have to introduce her to you because you knew her, of course, as a Sunday Times best-selling author, as a terrific journalist who's written groundbreaking stories on the real IRA, on child slavery and much more besides as well. These days, as well as being incredibly busy writing news articles for Fleet Street publications, she's also doing a radio programme for freedomslips.com, people I have a lot of time for, Revolution Radio there. Delighted that she's come back on this programme, a long time since she was on. Let's welcome back the great Christine Hart. Chris, welcome back. How are you?
Thanks, Richie. Gosh, that was a lovely intro. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Sure if my mic is...
Your mic is great. Can hear you loud and clear. Meant every word of the introduction, by the way. I've been reading you for years. Never thought I'd get to know you or that you'd be on this programme, but you are. And I must mention, by the way, folks, if you want to find out more about Christine, go to chrisjoehartmedia.com. That's chrisjoehartmedia.com. I'll tweet out a link to it. Chris is on Twitter as well, and I will tweet where you can follow her on Twitter as well. So Phil Campion, Chris, interestingly enough, I gave him a little bit of stick yesterday on the programme. I'm never rude or I never abuse anybody, but I said, you know, he's taken liberties talking about rounding people up and putting people in camps. I am aware that there are a lot of people in the UK whose opinion is just as important as mine who would agree with that. I'm going to put it to him on Thursday, but people have been saying, you know, there could be up to 25,000 jihadists in the country who might wish to do people harm. You've been writing about you've been writing about stories concerning terrorism in the UK for years. You're not that old, of course, but you have been. What do you think about the reality behind the threat faced by us in the UK today? What do you think?
Well, I spoke to Special Branch about it, and they told me that figure of 25,000, that's only the figure that this is off the record, that's only the figure they're giving out. So it's about 4 times more than that. So it's pretty bad. You know, I would say there's going to be a lot more attacks. I don't know what we can do about it. It's going to escalate. It's going to get worse. I don't know about rounding up people because obviously innocent people are going to be sucked in, but we're in the middle of a spiritual war, so it's a spiritual warfare. ISIS have been, you know, weaponized. They're a cult, you know, and they've got all the power of a cult. I mean, if you think of serial killers, if you take Brady, for example, he was setting up a killing cult where they kind of get a spiritual charge, like a demonic charge, through killing, and of course there's a promise of the 70 virgins, and that is a real incentive to them. They really do try and kill themselves to get this. They really do join ISIS to be connected to something that's more than the three-dimensional world. You know, at the moment, I mean, England especially is an atheist country, and it's very flat spiritually. So you can understand them having a calling to this death cult, this occultic group. They are occultic because they're over there in Syria. I've been informed by contact over there. They're drinking blood. They're chanting. Somebody that got away from them said when they were chanting, they started hearing voices in their head. So it's an occultic cult, and that is calling out to these people that want more. They've got a spiritual hunger, a supernatural hunger. So that's why they're joining, because they're getting connected to this. And we, the rest of us, we're not really offering anything like that. I mean, especially England and the English, we're not spiritual at all. We can't really lure them away from that. So it's only going to get worse because we've got no God. I mean, that's it. It's a spiritual war, and really we're an easy target because we're just mere mortals, and we're against something that is connected up to something stronger on the other side.
It could be argued as well that our gods, whatever they were, have been replaced by technology, haven't they? Nick Begich was on the program last week, and he's doing some very interesting work on how addiction to smartphones and tablets, Christine, is creating a barrier between us, that we find it difficult to connect with each other emotionally anymore, that we don't, we've lost that ability. That's really interesting. I'm going to come back to that in a minute on this ISIS and who and what they are and what they're doing. Staggering that special branch reckon there might be 100,000. I'm guessing that there's got to be degrees of what they understand to be extremism. I mean, again, I don't know, so I'm asking the question. You wouldn't imagine there are 100,000 who want to decapitate somebody in the UK or drop a bomb. Maybe people are being categorised as extremists because they hold views about who was responsible for 9/11, they hold views about Israel or whatever. What do you think? Or do they think that 100,000 are ready to commit murder?
Yeah, they do. It's a caliphate. If some of your listeners want to Google that and listen to these people out in Syria and other places talking about caliphate, it's a spiritual calling. It's like a holy war. So of course, to kill is seen as something that raises them up spiritually. And we are little more, Kafirs are little more than animals to them. So it's not really, they are willing to lash out at us in the same way a serial killer would be. Wouldn't think twice about grabbing a victim off the street if they're in the throes of something that is more intense to them in their own minds. And it's worse than, the IRA. We had the people are comparing Parsons Green last week to the IRA, but the IRA, that wasn't a holy war. That was about politics. And of course, they had the different cells. And so the police could keep watch on them. But with a jihad, you could be just, alone and then decide to go out and act. You don't have to be connected up to anybody. You could just decide, to go out and act. You don't have to connect. I mean, that's a scary thing. Whereas the old, like IRA terrorists, you had to be in a unit. You couldn't go and act on your own. And of course, we could negotiate with them. I mean, we paid them millions and, we gave them power. Even the INLA, the small little group that, the INLA they were given 7 million by the government. That's how running scared we were of terrorists. So we were running scared of the IRA and INLA. What are we doing now? I mean, they say MI5, MI6, they're completely overwhelmed by them. They don't know what to do because of what it actually is. So it's scary, actually. We're in a really scary situation.
It's interesting, Christine. We learned a couple of things. Obviously, I'm based in Manchester. Obviously, it's very, very recent. The arena bombing where 22 people died. And there's still a lot. I certainly wouldn't even dream of speaking for the city. How could I? I don't spend a lot of time, even though I'm right on the edge of the city centre. I don't spend too much time in there. But there's still that bit of tension when you're in and around Market Street in Manchester. You can feel it. Or when you're using public transport. There's that worry. But yet we learned about the Manchester Arena bomber, whose name was Salman Abedi. We learned that his father, Ramadan Abedi, was known to MI6. In fact, he was very well known to MI6. He was known as Agent Tunworth, and he was paid good money by MI6 in the 90s to take care of Muammar Gaddafi. And again, I have to bow to your expertise and your knowledge. You know more than anybody about the dirty deals done by the intelligence agencies in the UK with loyalists and with provisional terrorists in Ireland. I'd like to kind of smack some of these people in the face when they tell journalists like you, we're at a loss as to what's going on, because MI6 must have known an awful lot, Christine, about Salman Abedi. And yet he was able to wander around the city, having just come back into the country from Turkey. And I believe the French, and I believe even the Israelis, told our guys over here, this guy is dangerous, he's had contact with ISIS. And yet he was able to swan into the arena with a bomb and blow people up. And I'm just wondering about that. It's incredibly dirty, is what I'm trying to get at. Like, who's really controlling what's going on?
I know exactly. It's like the Omar bomb. Mooch Blair, who made the Omar bomb, he was an agent for MI6 as well, and they actually followed the bomb car, so that was allowed to go ahead. And as we all know, 9/11 was allowed to go ahead. And I remember somebody talking about it. Somebody from Washington was talking about it on the television. They were saying we'd never heard, CIA had never heard of the idea of flying planes into tower blocks, but it was in a book, and I'd read this book years ago, in fact 10 years before, called Holy War, and they'd captured one of these terrorists, and they said, that's our plan, we're going to get planes and we're going to fly them into the Twin Towers. So that was already out there, and yet they were denying they'd ever heard of it. So it's like somebody's letting it go ahead, certain things, because it suits the agenda of the deep state, and we're just little pawns that has to suck it all up. But
you see, that makes you a very rare breed. I don't know of any other Fleet Street journalist, Sunday Times best-selling author, who has the cojones, to use that dreadful phrase, to say something like that. People just won't say it. They won't speak out loud about our relationship with Saudi Arabia, where most of these Wahhabi following nutters came from. And what, and I mean, we know that the former French foreign minister, who I always forget his name, he was the French foreign minister under, I think it's Roland Dumas, who was the French foreign minister under Mitterrand. And he said clearly on French television, and he said to anybody who'd listened to him back in 2009, he was in the UK, and UK intelligence told him that there were plans for Syria, and did he want to consult on what was going to happen in Syria? And he said no. I couldn't argue with how you described ISIS. I think you got him down to a T. I've seen some of these disgusting videos, and I wish to Christ I could unsee them. And I'm not just saying that. I saw a video a couple of years ago. I didn't sleep for 3 nights thinking about it. And yet this deep state and the deep states of France and the United States and Israel played a big part in the success of these jihadists. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, of course they did. I mean, they armed them as well. And, they orchestrated us being flooded with immigrants. I mean, it's a whole thing. It's a whole attack on the Christian white man, isn't it? I mean, ISIS go around the neighborhoods and they talk about the Nazarene. They can't mention Christ. They call him the Nazarene. And it's just like this kind of dark energy is rising up and just kind of trying to wipe out anybody that's Christian. It's like an attack on Christianity as well, don't you find?
I used to laugh at that, you see, again, because I used to come from the, my dot is the only dot school. I used to see everything in terms of black and white, and there was a time when I would have argued with you. But I think you are right. I think you are onto something. We're getting a lot of tweets on this. Some of our listeners are saying they find it hard to think that there might be 100,000 here in the country ready to kill us all in our beds. If Special Branch are right on that, and I hope they're not right, obviously the destruction of Syria by ISIS and all the lies we were told about moderate rebels has driven out a lot of people. Maybe several million people have left the country. Germany welcomed them with open arms. Other countries did, well, they were told to by the European Union. And I suppose not very much thought was given, Christine, to who might be amongst these people.
And who was there even before that? I mean, who was here even before that? This has been going on for decades, isn't it? It's not just, they've come in with the refugees.
And yet we've learned, haven't we, that in some cases, imams at mosques in this country actually reported to their local police stations that they were concerned about things they were hearing. I think in the case of the Manchester bomber, I do believe it's on record that the imam got in touch with them and said, listen, this guy is not good. We're not liking what we're hearing from this guy and we're worried about him. And yet he was able to do what he did here. I mean, you've been reporting on this stuff for years, Christine. Where do you begin to untangle that? You know what I mean?
Well, the media really, I mean, as a journalist, I learned very quickly, especially when I was out in Belfast reporting back to newspapers like Sunday Times here and when I was working for the News of the World, and the editors tell you what to say and what not to say. And, you know, you might have something and it's a good story, but then they get their chain yanked by the government. So really, it's the media is completely controlled. I mean, as a journalist, you're just really a lackey. I mean, you really are. You don't really get to put your own stories in. Editors have the say, and editors, again, they're puppets as well. So, I mean, like the Manchester bombing was completely played down. There was no real pictures of the carnage that had gone on. There was no profiling that you normally have of the parents of the victims. I mean, it was just completely, after a few days, it wasn't in the news. And that really was a terrible way of treating us all like we're children, really. Don't talk about it in front of the kids, you know, don't mention it. And it was blown over and, you know, it comes up again and then the media play it down. And it just shows you how much we are kept in the dark and treated like kids, I suppose. Yeah, like children.
You made a career out of them. And again, this is not to be kissing your backside. It's the truth. You made a career out of asking serious questions of so-called authorities. It's interesting, whenever we see something happen, Christine, and I've talked a lot about it on this program, I've made a kind of a study of it. I'm not much for studying. But the media response to an attack is quite incredible in the way it's scripted to almost be a kind of a docudrama that reaches out and drags the viewer at home into it so that you become a part of it. You know, you almost can eat popcorn to it. They turn up at the scene, every one of them, and they broadcast for 3 days solid, and they stand there and they talk about our shared values, and Sadiq Khan will come on, or Andy Burnham from Manchester will come on. Well, he's not from Manchester, the mayor of Manchester, and they will say, we'll never be defeated, we'll never be defeated. They tell us stories of great heroism, some of which might be true, some of which might not be true, and it's like a little film. And you'll notice this because you're a real journalist, but people don't notice it. Absent from all of this theatre is actually serious questions of the likes of the mayors of London and Manchester, the politicians. The presenters go along with the script, which is, we are exceptional, we are great, they're coming after us for our freedoms, they hate our freedoms. There's no examination whatsoever of what went on. Again, you're not that, we're about the same age, you and I. Could you ever imagine this would be journalism, this would be presented as journalism, this nonsense?
It is, isn't it? It's like, I mean, just working in, you know, working on Fleet Street, and it was odd just to see how much the editors mixed with the politicians and got their chain yanked by this politician, that politician. It shocked me, really, you know, like our editor used to go and meet Blair, for croissants and breakfast. And I thought,
Wow.
why do that? And you just got to know the sort of fakeness of it all. And you got to start to think that other people there as well. I used to work with Dave Dillon, who's now the Mail on Sunday editor. And he said, we're like dogs, really, journalists. We're just dogs chasing bones. And it's not like All the President's Men. It's not like how they make out, really. You're not given any kind of power or any autonomy. You're just told what to do, and then your stories are changed and just to suit the agenda, and quotes you've got, they're ignored and another person's quotes are taken. It's all really, really engineered, and it's quite shocking. And I think a lot of people leave that business because they think, I don't want to be someone like that. Like Dave Dillon said, I want to be like my hero, Dustin Hoffman, in All the President's Men. I don't want to do this. He ended up staying, of course. I suppose the money is seductive and the power of being a news editor is seductive, but it's a fake job. It really is a fake job. I mean, however high you go, you are still just a puppet. And the reporting, and the public do believe it, I think, because they're entertained, and a lot of them just go along with how they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to live, how they're supposed to think of themselves. And we don't think for ourselves. We don't have an individual identity. We don't have a spirituality, which is something that could anchor us. And so we go along with their fake candy floss way of looking at things. And investigative journalism is completely dead. They killed that off with the phone hacking. And now they stamp investigation on things that actually aren't investigation. It's propaganda, pure propaganda, that they just want people to think. And they put on it investigation, like, we reveal and we uncovered. They didn't uncover anything. We're not allowed to do investigations. You're not allowed to do investigations at all. So why now do we, to dupe the public, stamp that word on things when we're not allowed to investigate? It's just a lie, and it's not right.
How liberating has it been for you blogging on your website and working with Revolution Radio? By the way, folks, freedomslips.com, Revolution Radio. We sometimes talk with the lovely Robin Falkoff on the programme, who presents a lot of terrific, very open-minded, critical thinking, original thinking presenters there. Christina's amongst them. How liberating is it for you then to do that, where you can look into things and venture an opinion based on information that you've gathered? It must be pretty good.
Well, not really, because I mean, after working for mainstream, you get used to seeing your name on the cover of newspapers and having your byline, and that their readership is in the millions, and then you go and do a little show, Revolution Radio, and how many listeners have you got? Certainly not millions. So it's this. You do feel that frustration, because you don't have the power of the press. They've got all the power. I mean, for instance, I published my book, Searching for Daddy. It became a bestseller with Hodder and Stoughton. I've written a much better book, Paradigm, and I've written it as a novel because obviously it involves like time travel, that kind of thing, but explaining, how the state is run. And I can't find an agent because they didn't want to publish that kind of thing, So it's frustrating because it is pushed into one corner. We don't have as much of a voice as we should have, as much of a voice as they have.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear, yeah. I mean, I'm often asked the question by ex-colleagues of mine, because I obviously come from commercial national media, and they say, what's it like, with respect to not being able to reach those sorts of numbers that you reached in the past. And without a trace of arrogance or defensiveness, I say to them, well, we do reach a lot of people collectively, not just this show, but other shows like it and your show. Collectively, we do reach increasingly greater numbers of people. I mean, but I hear you. It is difficult. The book you described, to me sounds very marketable. It's something I'd like to read. But this is bloody well what we're up against. Christine Hart is live on the line this evening. It's marvellous to have her back on the programme. It really is. Go to chrisjohartmedia.com to find out more about Chris. She's an award-winning journalist and Sunday Times best-selling author. And we're going to move on now in a second because we've got about 20 minutes left on this. We're going to move on to talk about, you've been following the Nibiru thing, haven't you?
Nibiru?
Yeah, Planet X and this. You've been following it a little bit, I think.
A little bit, yeah. It's quite interesting.
Isn't it? Yeah, well, I don't know. We might just briefly talk about that. I tried to get David Mead on the programme, and he's battered on one of the islands that's getting battered by all of these storms, and his communications are all over the place. They've been talking about the 23rd of September and all of that. But Chris is live on the line. Chris's own personal story is remarkable. It's profound. It's important. Mind control, phone hacking, sexual abuse. I don't mean to be flippant in the way that I'm saying it. It's hugely important. She spoke with us last year on the programme. That's on YouTube. Go to youtube.com and find it. It's great to have her back on the programme today.
There's something I want to bring up, which was I thought was quite interesting, which I'm investigating at the moment.
Go ahead.
There's more and more people. I had a lady on my show who had this experience going to the British Museum, and one of the statues, the statue of Sekhmet, had kind of she felt connected with her. And there's been quite a few people have approached me, emailed me, and saying that they are experiencing an upsurge in these Egyptian gods kind of coming to them and making themselves aware to them. I mean, I don't know if have you found that? Has anybody spoken to you about that? It's really kind of an odd phenomena that's going on at the moment.
I feel like an idiot because you mentioned this to me today briefly, and I hadn't heard anything about it. But of course, thanks be to Jesus for search engines. So I had a look around, and you're right. And I wasn't aware of it. Now, the goddess, Sekhmet was a goddess, right? Was an Egyptian goddess, or am I wrong? Or was Sekhmet a king? Yeah. A goddess. You're right, increasing numbers of people are claiming to have some sort of experience with ancient Egyptian figures. And that's as far as I got today, because until you mentioned it, I hadn't heard of it. That's really, really interesting in light of everything else that's going on. Yeah,
because it's odd. I mean, there's a book called Sekhmet written by an author called Nikki Scully, and there's another woman, Normandy Ellis. I had Normandy on my show the other week. And Nikki Scully, her book is very interesting, really interesting. She gives these meditations, and they're not like your normal New Age meditations that are quite hard to follow. They're very easy to follow, and they're quite unusual, that invoke this lioness goddess. And I was doing them the other week, and actually it's quite odd because you can get this kind of consciousness of this lioness goddess. It's really quite freaky, a little bit scary, but these energies, whether they're gods or not, I don't know. Somebody told me that they might be the Anunnaki. I always pronounce that wrong, but the Anunnaki returning. And of course, there's Gerald Clark and, Michael Tsarian and all these guys saying about the Anunnaki returning. Of course, that X-Men Apocalypse they did about one of the ancient gods returning. I mean, what do you think of that? I think that's really interesting, the idea that they might be returning in these times, that we're having such dark times right now, like it's almost like the end days, and these old figures might be actually returning or making themselves known so they can kind of join in with this battle that's raging. I mean, is that far out?
No, like I said earlier, it used to be. I used to be dreadfully rude years ago, Christine. In terms of, I never insulted anybody. I wasn't one to laugh at people. I never did that. I never mocked people. But I'd be rude about these types of things, and I used to think people were away with the fairies and stuff like that. But I've changed my mind, because rather than be an idiot who knows everything, I just started to read some of these books written by various men and women about all sorts of subjects, the cosmos, ancient Egypt, and I don't think it's far out there at all. Not because he's my mate, But I go along with one of David's core beliefs that several thousand years ago there was a massive change, in terms of us and our consciousness and our understanding of what we are. Knowledge was lost, and I do subscribe to that.
Was that at the time of the pharaohs in ancient Egypt? Because they were busy enjoying all sorts of things like time travel, a fourth dimensional consciousness, and then something came in and wiped them out. And somebody was telling me today that it was the Roman Empire. And it's so interesting because people are also saying that it's the Vatican behind the deep state, which is the Vatican, behind what's going on today. So there's this kind of darkness that has kind of made itself known and kind of got rid of that way we were living, dumbed us all down while it was little animals. Now it's finally going to finish us off. And it's like we can't really see. We're told, oh, it's Satan, but what does that mean anyway? That just means attacker. But we can't really, our problem is right now, we can't really see the enemy. And I don't think it's some little Muslim guy in a bedsit, really. I think it's something much more powerful than that.
Yeah, I think I think a number of researchers ultimately between them have the answers. I mean, you talked about that time period. I wish he was here to correct me, but David ultimately believes that our consciousness, our understanding of what we are, was hijacked, and it was hijacked by what he understands to be archon or archontic entities. He believes that you and I are here for sure, consciously we are, but that everything else is a simulation, a holographic construct, which was basically designed to imprison our consciousness and prevent us from understanding what it is that we really are. And in his presentations that he does around the world, which go on for 12, 13 hours, it's staggering how he presents that using his own research, but also the research of others that went before him. And I find it compelling, this idea. And there are a lot of clues, and you touched on it there. When you look at ancient Egypt and even ancient Rome and other parts of the world, Central America, South America, there are all manner of clues, carvings, artifacts, scriptures that lend credence to the idea that there was a time, Christine, when we were vastly superior intellectually than we are now, right? That's what you're getting at.
Yeah, and we were, of course, as a race that these archons have seeded. So there's a part of humanity, as Terrans as they call them, this particular archonic force has seeded. So they're doing their job for them. So we've got an enemy in our midst. And then you look around and you see, okay, the world's really dark. So who has the power? And then you look at, well, it must be the Jews. And then you look at who's yanking the chain of ISIS, who's funding them, and you see Mossad and the deep state, and then you think, well, actually, is it the Jews? Are they carrying this archontic force to kind of wipe the rest of us out? I mean, is that what's going on, really? Is that what happened to the ancient Egyptians? They were wiped out by the Romans. I mean...
Zionism and Zionists. I mean, I differentiate strongly between Zionists and Jews. For me, Jews...
Well, of course, I'm not being...
No, I know you're not. I'm not making any apology for what you said, not at all. I know you're not. I know exactly what you're saying. For me, Jews as people are an identity group like Catholics or Christians or Muslims or Buddhists, and I always get hammered for saying that. It's like I'm being disrespectful to people's beliefs. I'm not at all. They're an identity group. Jews are not a race no more than Christians or Catholics are a race. But the secret society that was Zionism, that we see now as political Zionism, undoubtedly it's hugely central to that agenda. I mean, positions, Jews make up, Zionist Jews make up less than 1% of the population of America, the ethnicity. And yet, Christine, the Zionist Jews inhabit pretty much all the major financial positions in the country. and have a huge influence politically on the United States, not just on the United States and on the UK. So I know exactly where you're going
The
with
CIA, they armed ISIS. Okay,
Absolutely.
these guys have got the death cult, but who kicked them off? And now, of course, they're under supernatural control. But of course, we know that the people in charge, they have got this power. They have got voice to skull technology. They have got all this kind of stuff. Their technology is so far advanced that we would have complete culture shock if we came in contact with it. So we're really fed on crap. We're kept in the dark. We see, we're fed fairy stories, really. We're like children in an orphanage. We've got no father to call out to because we're completely spiritually cut off. I mean, I'm trying to investigate who the hell is our God. I mean, is it Ra? Is it Aten? Is it Yahweh? I don't think it's Yahweh. I mean, how sick is that we're in this position that we don't even know the name of our creator, really? But we don't care, as long as there's something good on the TV, as long as we can have McDonald's, as long as, house prices are going up, we don't really care. So I don't know, maybe we deserve this.
Do you know, it's fascinating you saying that. We were talking recently about The Century of the Self, the really good documentary by Adam Curtis, and then David has done a load of work on the attempt to almost dehumanize us and prepare us for a kind of a future transhumanist society. We've never been more inward looking and more disconnected from one another. And of course, what you described there, TV, entertainment, if you could call it that, but the devices that we use now have made us like that, made us almost apathetic to everybody else and to the real questions and the important questions. And we're just consumers. It's like the Romero movies about zombies. That's what we've become, really. Just kind of mindless consumers. Do you know, it's interesting you mentioned there about the CIA and ISIS. And it seems like you and I are about at the same stage in terms of our journey of trying to understand some of this. I think we're at about the same stage. You and I are kind of reading and listening to the same people. Jordan Maxwell and Zecharia Sitchin over the years, they wrote a lot about how these senseless invasions of countries and wars are actually these creatures, and they're not all Zionists, but a lot of them are Zionists. They're actually sacrifices to gods, or to gods that they believe in or that they are worshipping in some way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And Jordan did an amazing piece with me a year or so ago where I never asked him a question. I just shut up and let him speak for 2 hours. And he talked about blood sacrifices to the gods, and he spoke about the planets and the ancient gods and the Roman gods and the Greek gods. It's quite staggering, really. And it ties into this. And we came in on this, of course, you talking about how people are reporting visions or experiences with imagery or images of ancient Greek gods. It's just fascinating. Here's a laugh, though, not to try and lighten it up, but you're a Fleet Street journalist, an award-winning journalist, a great writer. How do you get people to think about this, Christine? How do you get Josephine Smith, to actually consider that something so far out there might lead them down some path of understanding as opposed to, this reality? How do you even get near that without being laughed at?
I was thinking about that today. I was reading, actually, you need to offer power and you need to offer supernatural power. And then I was thinking, well, how do you convince people that have been in this state of not believing in God or not being interested in anything spiritual? And I think probably by magic tricks. I mean, obviously I can't do it, you can't do it. Yeah. But, the water into wine Jesus kind of, oh my God, look at it. That's what you need. Somebody like that, really a savior, I suppose, Christ to come again to sort of wake us all up. That would be awesome.
Here's a question for you then, because let's take it back a bit to the practical or the pragmatic terror threat here in the UK. I wonder, we talk a lot on here about the creation of money and the banking scandals, and money is an energy, really. It's created out of thin air by bankers who loan it. They don't have it to begin with. They get us all in debt, and then they come and, in lieu of the debt they say we owe. They take real wealth. They take land and property in countries. And we know about the CIA and MI6, how they funded, trained and brought the Wahhabi lunatics ISIS into existence. I wonder, is it more easy? It's not easy, of course, at all. But is that the path to talking about the esoteric things we talked about? If we can show people how rotten and filthy and corrupt the everyday news and the everyday kind of life experience is, that might be a path even to them opening their mind to understanding some of what you've been talking about.
Yes, and yes, indeed. And it's always a shame that when something bad happens to somebody, that they start looking for more meaning in life. You know, they get something like an accident, or they get illness, or they lose someone, and then it kind of wakes them up. I always thought it's a shame, isn't it, that pain wakes us up? But there's a book actually by David Lindsay, a really brilliant book, Voyage to Arcturus, and there's a character in it called Crag. And during this guy called Maskell, during his journey through the book, he wakes up at the end of it and he becomes his higher spiritual self, which is called Nightspore. And he turns around to Crag and he says, "What's your name on earth?" And Crag says, "It's pain." And he says, "Oh, I've known you well." So it's pain, which we're all scared of. We do want to feel it. We drink, we buy clothes, we do anything but feel. And it's by feeling that we'll wake up. Pain will wake us up, because everyone's on Prozac. So
yeah.
They like that. They like us on Prozac. You know, I mean, we've got to have the guts to feel, because it will awaken us to a much better life. And we'll have our spiritual experiences. Spiritual experiences are out there. God is waiting to give us spiritual experiences. You don't have to be on the dark side, you know, slitting necks on a riverbank to experience the four-dimensional realities. It's there for all of us, you know. We've just been dumbed down.
And you can see that and I'm asking you this, you can see that in your daily travels, your daily life. You can see how much more medicated we all are. It seems like there's a condition invented every other day of the week. It seems that we're being pressured more and more. Last week we had the incredible story, Christine, I think the BBC ran it, that said the NHS are so tired of people not coming in to be tested for A, B, C, D, E, F and G. They want firefighters and they want small businesses to administer tests to people. I'm not making this up. I covered this last week. You think there's definitely an agenda there to medicate people into a position where they just accept bread and circuses, which you described brilliantly, but it's more like beer, bread and circuses. You see that we're being medicated to prevent us kind of waking up to that.
Yeah, of course. It's definitely an enemy, a very, very active enemy, and we need to do something about it. And we need to do something where we infuse ourselves with powers that aren't of this realm. I know it sounds far out and maybe silly, but it's the only answer, because there's not an answer with us. We can't really do anything because they've been going now for a long, long time, and they're in a position of power over us. And it's got to a pitch now where Earth is quite a dark planet, really. It is a dark planet. There's no point pretending that it's not. It's pretty grim.
Let me just say this before, because that's been a really quick 45 minutes. Jesus, it's just absolutely flown by. I want to say this before you go. It's in no way to patronise you. Don't underestimate the power of doing the programme that you do for Revolution, for Freedom Slips. And I'll tell you why. Because you're creating an incredibly positive vibe and energy by doing it. And whether 500, 1,000 or 1,500 tune in, I know that through podcasting and YouTube uploading, a lot more people hear those interviews and those shows that you do than you actually realise. And I'm not patronising you in saying that. I mean, we know this ourselves. I mean, okay, Fab, which has done unbelievably well over the last few years, puts this programme out live, and so does David. But we started with very little, and we've been able to get it to thousands and thousands of people on a daily basis. I think that what you're doing with that program is good. It's obviously not, the byline on the front page of the Times or the Express or the Mail or the Mirror or the News of the World, but it does have an impact. It really does, and yours is a voice definitely worth listening to. So stay positive about that.
I have to get myself a cool Irish accent like you, Richie.
I'm originally from Kent. I learned how to do this accent many years ago. Is the old joke. But no, I'm serious about that. I know a lot of people who make content like yours, and they get frustrated, and they say, "Oh, Richie, it's hard to get people to listen." And I put it on YouTube. It only got 500 listens, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, that's probably 700 to 800 people. What's wrong with you? That's a fantastic start. Build on that. It is frustrating, and then YouTube and Google are demonetizing people.
I saw a YouTube the other day about a woman who had 10 subscribers, and she was crying, and she said, "Oh, it's so beautiful, 10 people that are listening to what I say," and actually made me cry, because I thought, I should be grateful for everyone that subscribed to my channel, not just look at it and say,
there's a lot more. There's a lot more than 10 doing it, folks. I just want to say, it's amazing to have a Sunday Times bestselling author and Fleet Street reporter who's written award-winning stories about some of the biggest issues of our times, talking about these issues. So support her, bookmark her website, chrisjohartmedia.com. Listen to her on freedomslips.com, Revolution Radio. Check her out. She's on Facebook as well, and I'll tweet out where to find her on Twitter. By the way, from the bottom of my heart, let's not leave it a year before you come back on again. Come back anytime you want. I could listen to you all day.
Oh, thank you, Richie. Yeah, I really had fun. Thank you. It's been nice.
It's been brilliant, Christine. Thanks for doing it. Stay in touch.
God bless, Richie. Thank you.
You too. Bye for now. The wonderful Christine Hart, live on the line from her home, chrisjohartmedia.com. And it's freedomslips.com. That's where you can check out her program.